started very soon. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Bonifaz with Free Speech for People. We're going to get started very soon with this town hall event on abolishing super PACs. We appreciate you all taking the time to join us this evening, and we're looking forward to the discussion. Thank you. If you're just joining us, this is John Bonifaz with Free Speech for People, and this Fall of Freedom event is focused on abolishing super PACs. We're going to be discussing a major case pending before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit, which has the opportunity to lead to the abolition of super PACs nationwide. And we're going to talk about the impact of super PACs on our democracy and why we must put an end to them. So thank you all for joining us. We'll get started very soon. Hi, everyone. This is John Bonifaz. If you're just joining us, thank you so much for coming on board this event. We have a town hall discussion tonight on abolishing super PACs, part of a Fall of Freedom series, standing up to authoritarianism and protecting our democracy. We're going to be discussing tonight the impact of super PACs on our elections and why we must work to abolish them, with a particular focus on a major case out of the state of Maine that's pending before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit that has the opportunity to end super PACs nationwide. We're going to discuss the legal framework for that case, and we're going to be able to have that discussion with Professor Larry Lessig of Harvard Law School, founder of Equal Citizens, as well as others on this panel, and we're looking forward to it. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be getting started very soon. And Glenn, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and thank you so much. Before we get started too far here, I just do want to point out that in the chat, we are
Hello, can everyone hear me?
And we're here with Women's March. So be excellent to each other, behave yourselves.
All right, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here holding space with you all. Welcome to the first version of Imagine, Believe, Build. We are here tonight to discuss super PACs in honor of the Fall of Freedom collective series. And the main thing that we want to get across today is that, as we know, we are in unprecedented times. Authoritarianism is on the rise. But what we're really aiming for here is beyond authoritarianism. It's systemic. It is beyond Trump. It is a system that is broken. And so we're here in collaboration with Free Speech for People, Equal Citizens, the Women's March, and Arts Equity Group for the foundation of a series, Imagine, Believe, Build. And so my name is Glenn Kontav, and I am the founder of Spirit. We are a civic imagination studio, and we use augmented reality to empower people to see a vision that is beyond what the billionaires dictate to us. We gained inspiration from scholars such as Ruha Benjamin, who talk about the fact that the billionaires are the ones who tend to dictate our material reality and our imagination to us. And we need to think outside of that specific and limited scope. And so what better place to start than oligarchy? By definition, we are not in a democracy as of right now. There was a Princeton study that dictated that if a bill that was on the floor of Congress had 0% public support, or if that same bill had 100% public support, that the chance of it passing, regardless of anyone being interested in the bill, is 30%. And that speaks to the billionaire influence in our elections. And so the goal here is to start this series for people to understand the dynamics of the corrupt system that we are in. And we have brilliant legal scholars here to unpack the potential Supreme Court case that is in front of us. So without further ado, I'd like to start by introducing our first panelist, Lawrence Lessig. Professor Lawrence Lessig is a professor of law at Harvard University, and he has been at the center of this fight for decades now. And so we'd like to transition over to him. The first thing I'd like to ask is, if you were to be able to leave everybody with the understanding of one thing, one takeaway from tonight, what would that be?
Yeah, so I would frame it like this. I'm a big admirer of Bernie Sanders, and I think he's been one of the most inspirational political leaders of our time. But he'll often say something like this. He'll often say, super PACs are the corruption of American democracy, and therefore we have to overturn Citizens United. Now, I believe he's right about the first part of that statement. They are the corruption of American democracy, the worst feature of the way we fund campaigns today. But Bernie is absolutely wrong about our need to overturn Citizens United in order to end super PACs. The critical work that's been done by many scholars long before I even recognized the point, led most importantly by Free Speech for People, but scholars like Larry Tribe and Al Alschuler and Richard Painter and Norm Eisen pointed out many years ago a fundamental logical error at the core of the cases that gave us super PACs. The cases that gave us super PACs were not from the Supreme Court. They were from the DC Circuit Court of Appeals 3 months after Citizens United. And then they were echoed by a couple other circuits in the first couple of years. And those cases made a really critical logical mistake. So what they said was, Citizens United held that independent expenditures could not create a risk of quid pro quo corruption. They were independent. There was no coordination. If there was coordination, they weren't independent. And so since they were separated, they didn't create the risk of corruption. Now, you can believe that or not, but the point is that logical claim was extended by the DC Circuit when they said, well, if independent expenditures create no risk of corruption, then contributions to committees that make independent expenditures create no risk of quid pro quo corruption. It kind of sounds logical on the surface, but then my favorite United States Senator, Robert Menendez, in 2015, proved this logical claim false because he was indicted in 2015. The indictment was he had engaged in quid pro quo corruption. He had promised favors to a Florida businessman in exchange for a promise to contribute to Menendez's super PAC. So there was the thing the DC Circuit said couldn't happen, which happened. Indeed, Menendez's lawyers had the chutzpah to argue that they should dismiss the indictment because the thing he was indicted for, the DC Circuit said could not happen, as if logically you could make him innocent. Now, obviously, they didn't dismiss the indictment, but the point is that really crystallized the mistake. And since then, groups like Free Speech for People and Equal Citizens have been working to try to tee this question up and give the Supreme Court the first chance to actually address this question and determine whether, in fact, Citizens United requires super PACs. And so what we did in Maine was to fund the ballot initiative, to get the initiative on the ballot. We had nothing to do with the campaign, but just to get the initiative on the ballot. And I was part of that. I gathered signatures on Election Day 2023. First guy to come up to me said, I'm here gathering signatures to get Donald Trump on the ballot in Maine. What are you here for? And I showed him my initiative, and he said, hell yeah. And he signed it. And he then said, I'm going to get everybody who's signing my petition to sign your initiative. And that's what he did, because this is not a political issue in America among citizens. In Washington, it's a political issue, but among Americans, it's not a political issue. And in Maine, 75% of voters voted for this initiative. More than 600,000 Mainers. That's more people voting for this initiative than had ever voted for anybody or any initiative in the history of Maine. And then that initiative was challenged by 2 super PACs, and it went to the district court. And the Attorney General was defending the initiative, and we recruited Neil Katyal to help us by intervening on our behalf and defending the initiative. And Neil Katyal was able to convince the district court that these earlier cases were wrong, that in fact, obviously, there's a risk of quid pro quo corruption if you make contributions to an independent political action committee. Menendez, there's a whole list, a litany of cases. And so when he convinced her of that, we thought that was it, we had won. But then she constructed a whole new theory of the First Amendment to show why, even though she admitted there was a risk of corruption, that didn't entitle Maine to regulate contribution to super PACs. Now, I think this is a perfect way to lose in the district court, because this is the most extreme any opinion has ever been. And that means that I think the First Circuit, which has never considered this question, will rule in our favor. And that will put it in the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court, all that they will be arguing is not overturn Citizens United, as much as we would love that. That's not the argument that strategically it makes sense to make. The argument we'll make is embrace Citizens United and apply its logic to a set of facts you've never considered. And if you do, then you must conclude super PACs are not constitutionally compelled, and that the citizens of Maine, and if the citizens of Maine, then a federal law too would come back to life to end super PACs. And my belief is by 2028, we will have ended super PACs across America and in the state of Maine.
I mean, that excites me. I think that can truly change the country and open up a scope of opportunities that we never had before as far as what's possible on a legislative basis. And I'm in full support of what you're doing. One point, though, I'd love to just use this moment to, if you could expand upon the opportunity of what that could mean, how the country could change if this were to be overturned.
Yeah, I think that we don't appreciate enough just how poisonous this corrupt funding system is to ordinary Americans in our democracy. It's the insult added to injury. I mean, we already see, Glenn, you cited the Princeton study by Martin Gilens that demonstrated that, in fact, our politicians don't care about us. They care about the elite, the economic elite, who are primarily the people funding their campaigns. So it's already clear they're not doing what they should be doing for us. They're doing what they need to do for the funders. But the insult is that when this money is so obvious, when you've got one man contributing $277 million to elect a presidential campaign, and that's not even the largest. 75% of the super PAC money came from people giving $5 million or more. Now, how many people is that? So when you've got such a tiny, tiny group that is obviously controlling the way our elections are coming out, ordinary people look at this and they're like, this is just not for me. This has nothing to do with me. The system is not for me as a citizen. And I think that we undercount how critically important it is to change that so people feel like they're part of our democracy. And I actually think, when you look at the Mandami election, many people say it was because of his radical views, and I love his views, but I don't think that's what did it. I think what did it for him was that because they had public funding in New York, he could afford to be a real viable candidate without taking any billionaires' money and with strongly resisting the idea of any super PAC supporting him. He became identified as the independent candidate who had integrity in the race. And he could point to people like Cuomo and say, look, that guy is bought. He's been bought for the last 20 years. And what Americans rally to, what New York citizens rally to, is the idea that you would have a leader who could lead, who was free to lead, as my friend Buddy Roemer, the former governor of Louisiana, used to put it, free to lead and not bound to the views of this tiny number of people who are funding their campaigns. And that's what we have to give our politicians the chance to be, so that Americans can once again imagine a democracy that cares about them, not just about these funders of these campaigns.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that oftentimes there are people who look for that messianic leader with a certain gravitas to inspire them. And I think that it's often a lot simpler. Like the reality is that there are plenty of people who are wired like Zoran Mamdani throughout the country, but they're outspent. If you look at AOC's election in 2018, when she beat Joe Crowley, she was outspent 10-1. She literally had to be 10 times better in order to get into the position that she got to, right? And so with this type of work that you're doing, if we are changing the system so there's a realignment of incentives and rewards, then it opens up a whole new slate of candidates and possibilities.
Yeah,
and so
exactly.
I think everyone needs to take that away, take that home. Like the ideas are there, they're just outspent.
Yeah. Can I just ask, Glenn, I just want to put one slide up. So we took, when we filed our case, 9 organizations, including Free Speech for People, representing Maine families for working families, but 9 organizations filed amicus briefs in this case, and including an amicus brief from Mark Cuban and 4 other billionaires talking about how critical it was to end these super PACs. Wow. And when I read those, I was so moved because they are the most powerful collection of arguments for why we are right. And so if you go to this link, this will take you to Amazon, and there's a Kindle version and there's a paperback version as well of this book, which is just the book of these amicus briefs. And if you read this book, you will be inspired by this argument, which is so clearly correct. And again, pushed originally by Free Speech for People so powerfully. And I think for the first time, I've been in this fight for 18 years. For the first time, I am genuinely optimistic that we have a shot at winning this fight. Because as much as people look at this court and say they are a corrupted court, super PACs don't benefit the Republicans. It's just as good for the Democrats, or just as bad for the Democrats as it is for the Republicans. And that institution is looking for a way to demonstrate that it's not just bought. And this is a simple gift. I feel like I'm giving the Chief Justice a gift. We're saying to the Chief Justice, you can say our principles have been right, but applying our principles, it just turns out that our decision is something 80% of Americans agree with. And that would be an enormous victory.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about this divergent way of thinking that you're presenting to the courts, it honestly reminds me of like a Chinese finger trap. Instead of actually going against Citizens United, which is so much, it's a whole other beast, right? You're using its logic at a point where the court has to concede nothing.
That's right.
So yeah, this is definitely feasible. Is there anything in terms of the foundation of this case or any prime takeaways that you'd like to share before we move to the next speaker? We'll bring you in later, of course.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Just one thing. It is so critically important that we change the narrative about this case. Like the narrative about this case is, this naive law professor and these naive people who think that the court is going to overturn Citizens United and uphold their initiative. And the reason that's a terrible narrative is that it actually makes it easier for the court to do the wrong thing. Because if you think that we only win if they overturn Citizens United, there'd be many people who said, like, we don't like Citizens United, but we understand the Supreme Court's not going to overturn their own doctrine. But the point is, if they don't rule with us, it's not that they haven't overturned their doctrine. They have extended an insane conception of campaign finance law far beyond anything they've ever done. It would be the most radical decision they've ever adopted in the context of campaign finance. Now, many people are cynical about the court, and I get that they think that's exactly what they're going to do. But when they do that, if they do that, I don't think they will, but if they do that, we need to understand exactly how awful that is, because then it's the next stage of the revolution. It is amend that Constitution and shut the institution of this kind of judicial review down. But we only recognize this if we speak about this case honestly. And this case is not a hard case for this court. It is an easy legal case for this court. And the only question is whether they will do the right thing. And if they don't, then it is an extremely serious issue for us to take up in a completely different way.
I think to your point, it requires galvanizing the public, getting public buy-in, and having them understand the stakes that are truly at hand here. And so I'm with you every step of the way. We'll continue doing, in terms of spirit, we'll continue doing our Imagine Believe Build speaker series and support you all the way up to the courts.
Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to move on to our next speaker now. We have John Boniface. He is a constitutional attorney and the co-founder of and president of Free Speech for People. Mr. Boniface previously served as the executive director and general counsel of the National Voting Rights Institute, an organization he founded in 1994, and as the legal director for Voter Action, a national election integrity organization. He's been at the forefront of key voting rights and democracy campaigns in the United States for more than 3 decades. Mr. Boniface is a 1992 cum laude graduate of Harvard Law School and a 1999 recipient of the MacArthur Genius Grant. So without further ado, Mr. Boniface.
Thank you, Glenn. Great to be with you. Great to be with Larry Lessig and all of you listening tonight, and with Rachel, who I know is going to join us soon for Women's March. So I'll just start off, Glenn, by saying that Free Speech for People, we've been around, as you've referenced, for 15 plus years now. We were founded on the day of the Citizens United ruling in January 2010, and we fully support what Larry Lessig and Equal Citizens have been doing in this main case. We've been proud to partner with them in this broader fight to abolish SuperPACs. And to put it in context from where we are at Free Speech for People, we have been at the forefront of multiple fights for our democracy, including calling for a constitutional amendment to overturn the Citizens United ruling and the Buckley v. Vallejo ruling. The Buckley ruling equated money with speech. The Citizens United ruling equated corporations as people with political speech rights. But in the context of this fight, we also have to take on initiatives that do not require overturning Citizens United, as much as we believe we have to keep fighting for the amendment. And this is one of those critical initiatives. It's not the silver bullet. It's not going to deal with all the problems of our campaign finance system. We still need to fight for public funding of elections. We still need to end multinational corporate spending in our elections. But this is a fight that we can win and must continue to engage in, because it holds out the real opportunity that we end this vehicle in which billionaires and moneyed interests have been dominating our politics for the past 15 years. And the thing that I'll add to what Larry so eloquently shared about the legal framework is that the DC Circuit Court of Appeals ruling that created SuperPACs was never appealed at the time to the U.S. Supreme Court. They have never looked at this question. So what the main case offers is the opportunity for the First Circuit Court of Appeals to look at it for the first time. And if they rule the right way, as we hope they will, it will then offer the Supreme Court for the first time the opportunity to look at this question. The question before them will be whether unlimited donations to super PACs corrupt the political process and create the appearance of corruption. And after 15 years of history of super PACs dominating our elections and the ways in which corruption has been seen through that vehicle, we think the answer is a clear yes, that these unlimited donations to super PACs do corrupt the process, do create the appearance of corruption. And for the same reason that we limit campaign contributions to candidates, we need to limit campaign contributions to super PACs, and that's what the main law does.
No, I so appreciate that perspective. And so how does this fit into the broader scope of the work that you're doing with Free Speech for People? I understand that you're doing, I understand that you have the Abolish SuperPACs Act, for example, and you're taking various approaches to this.
Yeah, so as Larry mentioned, we are very much in support of this case. It's pending before the First Circuit, and we have presented an amicus brief on behalf of Mainers for Working Families. But we also have worked with Congresswoman Summer Lee and her office in drafting the Abolish SuperPACs Act. This is federal legislation that Congressman Ro Khanna as well has co-sponsored, and a number of other co-sponsors are now on board with it. And it would end super PACs in federal elections. Now, it's true that the existing limit that was on the books prior to the Speech Now ruling has yet to be removed by Congress. That limit is $5,000 and how much it can be given to any donor can give to a PAC. It's not being enforced because of the Speech Now ruling. So if you overturn Speech Now, you bring back that law. But what the Abolish Super PACs Act does is really create another vehicle for people to lift up this debate and to demonstrate that it's time to put an end to super PACs. So if you go to abolishingsuperpacs.org, we have a dedicated site for this bill, abolishingsuperpacs.org. You can read more about why Congresswoman Summerlee has introduced this. You can see a video of her discussing this. And it really, I think, is just another opportunity for us to do public education and organizing around this critical fight. I want to reinforce what Larry has said around the misnomer here. Citizens United did not create super PACs. So to overturn the Speech Now ruling does not require overturning Citizens United. In fact, what is happening in the main case is completely consistent with the Supreme Court's long-standing jurisprudence upholding limits on contributions to candidates. And those limits are upheld to prevent corruption, the appearance of corruption. And for the same reason, we need to have limits on how much donors can give to political action committees. So at abolishingsuperpacs.org, you can learn more all about this. And at freespeechforpeople.org, you can access the brief that we filed for Mainers for Working Families. But I fully encourage what Larry has shared, which is the book that's being produced by Equal Citizens with all the amici briefs that have been filed before the First Circuit.
Well, thank you so much for your work on all of these legal fronts. One of the things that I really admired about you after talking these last few months is the fact that you zoom out and you see that this issue is systemic and you're addressing it from a legal systemic perspective. What would you say, just being in the huddle and so deep into this work for decades, are some common misconceptions about the campaign finance system that people have and the ways to solve this issue in general?
Yes, well, certainly with respect to super PACs, the common misperception is that the Supreme Court created this through the Citizens United ruling, and that, as Larry said, even somebody like Senator Bernie Sanders says, to do that, to get rid of super PACs, we need to abolish or overturn, rather, Citizens United. That's a common misperception. I will say that there are some other misperceptions that are more longstanding than even super PACs have been with us, and that we contend need to be confronted, even in the context of what we know is this current court. First, the contention that money equals speech. You know, money is power. Money is not speech. And the fact is that those who have huge sums of money have the ability to drown out other people's speech. And then there are equal protection concerns as well associated with those who do not have access to wealth and do not have an ability to participate in this current wealth primary process. But another misconception, of course, is coming right out of Citizens United, which is that corporations are people with political speech rights. Corporations are artificial creatures of the state. They have state-based advantages that you and I do not have: limited liability, perpetual life, the ability to aggregate wealth and distribute wealth. And for those reasons, they cannot and should not be treated as people with constitutional rights. So those are misconceptions, I should say, that the Supreme Court itself has embraced and need to be challenged and should be with a constitutional amendment fight. But when it comes to super PACs, the biggest misperception is that we're stuck with them until we overturn Citizens United. We're not. And this case out of Maine has the opportunity, as I said, to abolish super PACs nationwide. And it's a very exciting case, and I applaud Larry Lessig and Equal Citizens for their catalyzing role in putting this on the ballot in Maine and making this case possible in their leadership and helping to defend the Maine law. we're right there with them and with all the others who have filed amici briefs. And we look forward to the argument before the First Circuit, likely next spring, where again, for the first time, that federal appeals court is going to look at that 15 years of history and analyze for their own sake whether it's true that unlimited donations to super PACs are corrupting and provide the appearance of corruption.
Yeah. It absolutely blows my mind that someone like you or myself or anyone else in this room has a limit as far as an individual contribution, but corporations by definition do not. Like, that defeats the whole purpose of democracy. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we move on to the next speaker?
I think the only other thing I would just say is that, this is an all hands on deck moment for our democracy. There are a lot of threats happening, we know, to our democracy. But one thing that's exciting about this particular initiative is that we can together recognize that there is the potential for, at least on this front, winning a major fight to protect our democracy in this moment before these courts. And so I encourage everyone to learn more at abolishingsuperpacs.org, to go to Equal Citizens, to go to Free Speech or People, and to join us in this fight in calling for the abolition of super PACs.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One thing that is so important for everyone to know is that this is quite literally an intersectional fight. It does not matter what your issue is, whether it is green energy or mass incarceration or immigration. If we do not solve for corruption first, we will not be able to solve for any of these issues in a meaningful way that makes sense to the people. And that is why we have our next speaker here, the Women's March. So we have Rachel O'Leary Carmona. She's the executive director of the Women's March. And like, that speaks to the intersectional approach of what we're doing. So just a brief bio. So as the executive director of the Women's March, it's a network that forms the backbone of the largest political home for women and most effective base building organization on the left. And under Rachel's leadership, the Women's March drove record turnout in 2018, playing a key role in defeating Trump in 2020, and anchored 4,500 nationwide actions in the United States, mobilizing tens of millions in 2022, and mobilized women in the pivotal 2023 Supreme Court race in Wisconsin, a race that was called the most important of the year by the New York Times. So without further ado, Rachel O'Leary Carmona.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I just need to adjust the lighting. One second.
I was like, mine is too. I'm coming in hot from a Walmart parking lot outside of Lubbock, Texas. So we're kind of always on the move here, and I didn't get as far as I wanted to today. So coming to you from my car.
We're glad to have you here to begin with. I think what I need to do is just come out here. Welcome, bear with me one moment. Okay, and we're back. All right. So, yeah, it's incredible that you've been so supportive in this fight. So, my main question to you is, why does this case matter to the people that you organize with, and what do you need them to understand about money, politics, and how that relates to their own power?
Every time I get on a call with Free Speech for People, I always feel a little like kind of underprepared because I'm always like the one non-lawyer on the call or whatever. So the first thing that I'd say is I really appreciate the framing of this call talking about civic imagination, because I think that we can get really mired down in the like recipe and the policy of what we have to do. Like, here are the steps that we have to do to win versus like what we're actually trying to win. And I think that before we can actually get people mobilized to fight with us, we have to tell them what we're trying to win. And I think that's where the civic imagination piece really comes in. You have to be able to envision a different future. And I think one of the biggest things that you need to envision, or anyone should be envisioning when we're thinking about a functioning democracy, and making an analysis of how it, what were the components and the conditions that got us to the non-functioning democracy that we have. You have to talk about money in politics. You have to understand that, certainly Citizens United, but also the ability of super PACs to let a tiny, wealthy minority overrule the will of the people, I think it is a fundamental. And I think for Women's March, particularly coming out of the last 2 years since Roe was gutted, what is very clear to us is that the fundamental building block of any democracy is just one person. And when we start fiddling with the definition of what a person is, it allows the actual definition of democracy, the actual building blocks that we're building with, to be perverted. And so for Women's March, one, for example, this is, certainly you've already talked about it. It impacts abortion rights and safety and economic justice and, all of many of the things that we've seen. But, for us, when we're looking at, if I pull one that's just right at the top of my head, it's the fight around abortion, where a super majority of Americans do not believe in the policies that are being pushed forward by candidates who are supported by super PACs and judicial candidates whose careers have been fueled by those same dark, buckets of dark money, who are pushing forward policies that a super majority of Americans do not agree with. And this is where our democracy and our one person, one vote just begins to fall flat. So we know that this is one of the ways that they get around the fundamental fact that their agenda cannot win on its merit, and it has to be won through dark money, through rigged elections, through putting their finger on the scales, because it will not happen for them any other way, because this actually just isn't what the American people want.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate your perspective as a non-lawyer in this as well, because at the end of the day, like the purpose of this intersectional fight is the fact that, a lawyer will speak to a certain group of people, an immigration rights organizer will speak to a certain group of people that may not intersect with an environmental rights organizer, And so if there is someone in your community that isn't privy to the relationship between money, politics, corruption, and oligarchy, and you wanted to bring them into a conversation, into the fold, to understand its implications, how would you break it down to them?
That is such an interesting question. How would I break it down for them? I think I would really just talk about what we're talking about when we're talking about, like, what does democracy actually mean? When we think about democracy, it's not an end goal of a set of policy. I'm a policy girly. I'll out myself. If you Google me, you'll see I'm a Harvard Kennedy policy girly. So I don't come to this without my own ideas around and pre-baked conceptions about democracy and the role that it plays. But I think that when we're in this position where a small group of oligarchs are literally, trying to take control over, the running of our country, and this isn't just a matter of sort of my opinion or my political analysis. They say that that's what they're trying to do. They have people there who have written books who have said that. So I think I would just start with, what is democracy to you? The state of our country is such that we don't practice democracy very much. There used to be a time when we had unions, when we belonged to co-ops, when we had more credit unions, just places where we could cast a vote. There were membership organizations. People used to belong to Lions clubs and VFWs, and we would co-create our lives with each other. And it meant that we had to be tolerant of other people's opinions, and somehow find a way to move forward, despite the fact that we may not agree with any one decision or any one policy that moves forward. And I think when I'm thinking about super PACs, or how I would describe it, is that the way that we have, or the way that super PACs have intervened inside of a political process, means that reality doesn't hold. It's like you know, in the Avengers when they, you know, they're now the realities are completely shifted, because the people who are inside of those negotiations with each other, they're not people anymore. They are you know, corporations with unlimited resources compared to maybe not unlimited in real terms, but they're unlimited compared to mine and what I can do as a person. And so as I'm thinking about how we move forward, I'm thinking about playing a game in which it feels like I am negotiating you know, with other people, with other players, but the reality of this one player is that this player has been able to amass a level of power that I couldn't do if I got every other player on the board to organize with me. So it means that the power of individual organizing gets you know, muted. The power of individual votes gets muted. The power of individual campaigning and organizing gets muted, all behind corporate interests. And so I think that when we're talking about this, it's just like, you know, our democracy is not an outcome. It's not really, it can't, and I mean, it is also a system of governance, but I guess what I want to say is it's an activity. You know, it's an activity that we have to practice every day, and part of the way that we got ourselves as a society into this place is specifically the decline of third spaces, the decline of membership organizations, the decline of unions, through, you know, which were not natural declines, but rather you know, kind of a cooked up declines by powerful forces who do not want us to practice these things because it does not serve their interests. The people, you know, people after all elections be able to say, well, this group of people voted against their interests. No one votes against their interests. We just don't understand them well enough. And so that did not happen here. It did not happen in the decline of unions or the decline of membership organizations. We have to get clear on what people's interests are. And then super PACs and Citizens United and the ability of corporations to mute those conversations and to derail those conversations into corporate interests that serve the, you know, 100 most wealthy people in the world, and not just our country, in the world, completely fuels that march towards like, you know, a technocratic, you know, oligarchy that Yarvin or Teal or one of his folks might you know, outline as the ideal future of this country. So I don't know that was it's very hard to talk about super PACs, I think, in a way that you framed to people who don't understand. And I think that's actually the point. You know, it's a place where the rich and powerful throw rocks and hide their hands. It's not meant to be easily understood. It's meant to be confusing. It's meant to be obfuscatory. You know, it's meant to be like, oh, but me, I'm just an innocent super PAC, just expressing free speech. We can all get behind that. So it's meant to be a way in which the great and powerful Oz hides behind a curtain. And so I think that's the best thing that we can say is that it's not people that voted this in. It's not individual donors. It's a group of wealthy people who, you know, they don't want to pay their taxes and they want to get, they want to have generational wealth for eternity on our backs while our minimum wage is $7 an hour.
I think money for eternity versus a minimum wage of $7 an hour highlights the egregious discrepancy that we're in, right? Like that right there, everyone can understand and feel that. And I really appreciate the nuance in which you've approached both the thoughtfulness of your answer and your support in this campaign. So would love to dig deeper into the techno oligarchy that you spoke to, but I think it would be great if we can bring everyone else into the fold and continue the conversation. Yeah. So one of the main things that like a lot of people obviously see is that you have your Elon Musks of the world, your Peter Thiels of the world, who are putting in money, and the returns that they're getting are like beyond what you can get in the stock market, right? The billions of dollars of government contracts, the hijacking of our systems are so egregious, and it's corruption beyond measure. So I'm just curious for y'all, if you could articulate some of the systemic quid pro quo corruption that you see that everyone else may not. I think it would be critical as far as understanding the importance of disrupting the super PACs themselves.
Well, I would start with the tax system. You know, I mean, everybody on the right, especially, even though they're not really doing anything about it, is obsessed with the size of our deficits, and they talk about how there's all these things we have to cut. But the real thing that is wrong with American finance is we have a completely broken tax system. It completely crafts gifts to the super wealthy, these ways that you treat the type of money that Elon Musk makes. And the reality is there's just no way that changes until you change the way we fund campaigns, because they're able to essentially block any change from support on the right and the left. I had a friend who was an ally in this movement, who, very wealthy person, was in an event with Barack Obama in New York with a bunch of hedge fund people. And Barack Obama said, I saved your carried interest exemption. You need to do something for me. And it's like astonishing that it doesn't matter your politics. You realize you can't do anything to create a tax system that's taxing Americans at a fair rate that would give us the income we need to address the million problems that we face as a nation. So I'd love to solve those problems too, but I think this one is the cleanest way to see why the way we fund campaigns and super PACs make that change impossible.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I would add, the climate change fight, right? The oil industry's ability to dominate our energy policy and our politics. You had Donald Trump before this last presidential election literally say to oil executives, if you give me $1 billion, I'll basically do what you want in terms of ending any kind of renewable energies and any limits on the oil industry. That was a direct request for funding and a bribe, right? I mean, it's just complete out in the open. At least it was, at Mar-a-Lago behind some closed doors, but for people to hear. And yet that's what happens in this current system that we have. We have this system of corruption and appearance of corruption flowing primarily now through these super PACs, and you have billionaires who dominate the process along with corporate interests. But I will say just a story from a number of years ago, right when I was getting involved in this work out of law school, a few years out in 1996, during that presidential election cycle, Barbara Streisand and other major Hollywood executives hosted an event for then President Bill Clinton's reelection campaign with the Democratic National Committee. And they were raising millions of dollars that night at this Hollywood mansion. And an NBC reporter and cameraman did a very unusual thing, which is they staked themselves outside this fundraiser, and they wanted to ask questions of the donors who were there providing millions of dollars to the DNC and the Clinton's reelection campaign. And none of these Hollywood types, these actresses, actors, all these producers who are accustomed to the bright lights, none of them wanted to talk. They saw the cameras and they immediately got into their limos and they ran away. But one person was willing to talk, and that was Barbara Streisand. And so she came up to the camera, and I will say, she's been a supporter of this work in the past, and I appreciate that. But she came up to this camera, and they asked her, this reporter said, well, what do you think about this process? And she said, what do you mean what I think about this process? And he said, I mean, what do you think about this process of candidates having to raise large sums of money in order to compete and win for public office? And she paused for a minute and kind of backed up. And then she's like, well, that's what's great about America. If you have the money, you can do whatever you want with it. And then the reporter asked the follow-up question. What about those who don't have the money? And then she really seemed to pause and not sure how to answer. And she's like, well, they can vote. They can vote. So we can, as big donors, pre-select the issues that are on the table, off the table. We can pre-select the candidates who can go on to win because they have all the resources. We can dominate our politics and our government, and they can vote. And we know that the voting process needs to be much more than simply voting on election day. The voting process, as Rachel has highlighted, needs to be also about broader democracy participation. And we don't have that today in this current campaign finance system, where you have a very small set of donors relative to the larger population that dominates our politics. And that's what's so exciting about this particular case that is now pending before the First Circuit. And this fight to abolish super PACs is it provides an opportunity to reinstate the basic principle here that all of us have a voice in this process. All of us have an equal voice, and no one should be able to drown out other people's speech.
And I would add to that, you mentioned the Supreme Court cases in Wisconsin. And I think that's one of the most egregious cases for the abuse of super PACs, because Elon, you mentioned his name, and I just like to stay on his head. So Elon went in with his super PAC. He spent over 10 million on the race. He also gave directly to the candidate. He gave some to the Republican Party, but then I don't know if folks remember, because this, it's kind of hard to remember all of the shenanigans that have happened. But he, through his super PAC, also sent a petition out, and he was offering people $100 to sign this petition so that he could begin to farm votes for this candidate who, got his clock cleaned by the Democratic candidate who ran, Susan Crawford. But regardless, this was this was not just using a super PAC to put your thumb on the scales in terms of the donation, but also, doing unethical and deemed illegal activities by literally trying to buy votes. So I think that, some of the folks who brought us 2025 or the outcomes of 2024, carrying those forward into 2025, I think that some of the things that we've seen have been some of the most egregious. And it's related to the fact that they have literally unlimited pots of money. I mean, if Elon doesn't like it here, he could just get in a rocket and fly to Mars. He doesn't have to pay the consequences of his actions here. And he's got the kind of money that, in my opinion, render his speech above the rule of law, because there's so much money that he can just do what he wants and pour unlimited buckets of money into it. Now, I will say this, because I am sometimes against my own judgment as a pessimist. I do have optimism and I do have hope. I will say that organized people beat organized money in that race. And so I do think that there are ways that we can fight and beat it back. But as Americans, I'm from Wisconsin, as Wisconsin, people who were attacked by that directly, I think that we have to demand better, other than fighting for our lives against a trillionaire. Is he a trillionaire? A billionaire at least, who is here to put his finger on the scales. And why? Because he was throwing a tantrum. He didn't get to put 3 Tesla factories in Wisconsin that he wanted, and he had a grudge. We deserve better than that as Americans.
Yeah, we need to hold our civil society to a higher standard. One thing I'd like to share with all of you that blew my mind, that I learned over the summer, is that when the fire department was formed, it was once a for-profit entity, meaning that if your home was burning and if you did not have insurance, they were not coming. And over time, people realized that wasn't such a good idea. And now they show up, no questions asked. And so why can't that be the case with our healthcare system, right? Why do people have to choose between food and insulin? It's because these Delaware C corporations with fiduciary responsibilities to maximize profits are putting their, quarterly balance sheets over our civil society. And so my question for you, and the last thing I'd like to frame in terms of, imagine, believe, build, is we need something to go for, to fight for, right? Like, not just against Trump. What would y'all like to see in a world without super PACs? What is possible? I'd love for us to expand our minds in that way and share with the audience.
Larry, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
I'm going to say we then have to change the way we fund campaigns. There's a lot of exciting experimentation around the country about different ways to fund campaigns. My favorite experiment is in Seattle, where they've begun to give voters vouchers that they can use to give to candidates to help fund their campaigns. And that means candidates are focused on talking to normal people and ordinary citizens to rally them to collect the vouchers they need to run their campaigns. And so they can be independent and credible. They don't have to raise more money than anybody else as long as they've got this independent ground to run. And they can begin to call out the people who are the super PAC defended. So that's exactly, I think, what happened in New York in the Mandami race. And so I think John was exactly right. Our case, when we win the case that Free Speech for People has been fighting for, we've been fighting for, when we win that case, that's the first victory. Then we've got to push the idea of publicly funded or citizen-funded elections across the country. And those two things together, I think, would give people hope again that we could get a democracy that was focused on what ordinary people cared about.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That would change the game. Okay. So now we want to move on to the audience section. I'm sure that all of y'all have a lot of questions. I see there was one question. There's a question for you, John. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Thank you, Danielle, for asking it. How can everyday people join this fight, and what's our role? So first, I think as much as we have talked about this case tonight, I think it's important to understand that litigation does not happen in a vacuum. The courts are institutions that are not immune from what's happening outside their courtrooms. And I do think it's critical that we all be involved in standing up and demanding that there not be these entities such as super PACs that are undermining our democracy. So that can take various different ways. People can join us at the abolishingsuperpacs.org site, where you can sign a petition urging the support for the Abolish Super PACs Act. You can call your member of Congress to urge that they get on board, start being vocal and supportive this whole fight to end super PACs. You can write a letter to the editor saying you've heard about this case and you do think that people need to pay attention to this fight for ending super PACs. You can talk about why super PACs are undermining our democracy. You can share this with your neighbors and your friends about this fight. You can, as Larry highlighted earlier, download the whole book of Mikai briefs that have been filed in the main case and also distribute that and share it with your friends. There are many ways for people to get involved. Certainly, at these No Kings rallies that are happening, show up with a sign that says No Kings means also ending super PACs. We don't want any billionaires that, like Elon Musk, pretending they're kings either in our political process. So we all have a stake in this fight, and we all have a voice in it. And I think it'd be wrong to assume that we just have to wait for the courts to save us without our involvement. We do want to press the courts to do the right thing here, but we're all engaged in this fight for our democracy.
That's great. Other questions?
Well, there's one other, I guess I'll just jump on, which is somebody asked about the Montana plan and that project that's happening in Montana. So this is a campaign that's being launched by people in Montana with support from Center for American Progress. It's a very innovative campaign. It deals with structural reform of the corporate charter law in Montana. So effectively would change the way corporations are chartered in Montana so that they are not able to make political expenditures from their general treasury funds. It is, I think, an important new avenue for dealing with the threat of Citizens United, and it would obviously be a state-by-state avenue. It doesn't directly deal with super PACs. It deals with a separate question of corporate spending through their general treasury funds. But if it prevails in Montana, it will be a new way for there to be a challenge to corporate charter laws in other states.
That's great. Are there other questions? Can you scale us for the challenges ahead, legislatively, geopolitically, socially, logistically, financially? All right. That's a beast of a question.
Rachel, do you want to start us off on that one?
Well, one thing to anchor us, I feel like we spent a lot of time on the legislative aspects.
Yeah.
So perhaps the socially.
I mean, I would go back to the very beginning, and I would talk about civic imagination. And I think that when we're thinking about doing any of these things, we have legal cases that are going forward, right? But when we're talking about regular people who aren't a part of the legal processes, or who aren't a part of the organizations, who are bringing the cases, I think it's like, okay, so what role can you play, and where does that start? And I actually think a lot about AOC. I think a lot about someone who worked at a bar and had a TV on over the bar and was cleaning up at nights, and she thought, I think I could do that better. And she ran and she won. And I think about how much talent we leave on the table through our current process. So I think it really starts with having the hope, Miriam Kaba says that hope is a discipline. And I know this sounds very woo-woo in the context of like the lawyers who are chopping it up on the legal steps here, but I really do believe strongly, if you look at the history of legal cases in, the civil rights movement or the queer, gay rights movement or whatever, it wasn't like, oh, the Supreme Court really saw the error of its ways and came around. In some cases, the Supreme Court actually said, we've seen one of the criteria that we're thinking about was there a sea change in public opinion on this instance? I want to say that was in the marriage equality case. And I think that it is critically important for us to continue to talk about this and to continue to push as regular people, because in a world in which money becomes free speech, then that means that there is no such thing as a non-political actor inside of the ecosystem. And so if we understand folks as political actors, then we understand them that they can be influenced by political pressure. And so I think that it's important for us to imagine a different world and then to take active steps. Somebody said in the comments that democracy is a verb. It's something that we have to practice. So getting together with like-minded people. And actually, I think we talk about that part a lot. We don't talk about the other part a lot, which is getting together with not like-minded people and, making bridges to people who don't think about this, who aren't on a webinar right now, who don't maybe agree, and who haven't gone to a No Kings protest or a women's march or any of those things, and really talking to folks and letting them know exactly the ways in which the rug is getting pulled out from under all of us, and what the stakes are and ways in which they can think about things differently and then do things differently.
So to add to that, especially if we're considering the social challenges that are ahead, I've been thinking a lot about the frustrated town hall sessions that you see in Middle America, where people were talking about cuts to the social safety net, whether it be their healthcare, whether it be SNAP benefits, like everything is on the chopping block, especially with the advent of AI coming to take people's jobs, right? And the reason why I'm saying this is because this frustration with elected officials, in my mind, speaks to the fact that so many Americans are still unclear about how our political system works in terms of campaign finance, right? And so I urge each and every one of you in this call to tell 5 friends to go to opensecrets.org. It's a website to where you can trace the money. So if you see a candidate that you like and they're saying certain things that may or may not be true, go to Open Secrets and see if the money tracks with what they're talking about. So for example, if someone says, hey, like I'm the environmentally friendly candidate and they're getting money from ExxonMobil, they're not an environmentally friendly candidate, right? Like that right there is the challenge that we have ahead, because like the Trump administration is continuing to cut things little by little. And there will be more frustration, there will be more anger, but if we can channel that into something actionable, I would say tell your friends to go to opensecrets.org and follow the money. And then from there, support this campaign to get it to the Supreme Court. That's how you change the system.
Yeah. Can I just, I want to add something about it's a great question to think about social changes. We're in the middle of an emergency somewhere. There's something really extraordinary about the idea that judges get to tell 600,000 Mainers that they're not allowed to protect their elections from the corrupting influence of money. There's something kind of weird about how we've ceded so much power to these judges, especially because, one of the aspects of our case is advancing an originalist argument that the conservatives embrace. And we have two of the leading originalist scholars who submitted briefs to say, there is no doubt that under the original meaning of the First Amendment, what the framers gave us, there would have been no problem with this legislation or 100 other laws that would make it so we would have a less corrupt political system. So, I'm not saying you should be an originalist, but what I am saying is when the Constitution does not itself actually forbid any of this, it's just the interpretation of these judges that they've continued to extend over time for whatever reason. There's a certain point at which I think people in a democracy have got to say, what the hell? Like, who are you in this process? And to stand up for the idea that our democracy is ours, our Constitution is ours, and the idea that overwhelmingly Americans support this kind of regulation, but that somehow doesn't really seem to matter, is, I think, a serious weakness in the attitude, the mentality we bring to our democracy right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Does anyone have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I'm grateful, Glenn, that you led this, and I'm grateful to John for putting this together. And Rachel, it's great to meet you in this context, but it's so exciting to see the group fighting for this cause. And again, my brand is pessimism, and I'm not on brand because I am totally optimistic that we have a huge victory ahead of us, and that's just the beginning of getting a democracy back.
Well, and I also want to express my appreciation first to Glenn for conceiving of this whole town hall and moderating this, and of course to Rachel and the team at Women's March for hosting us, and Larry for your amazing leadership in this fight. We're proud to partner with you, and we really, the fight for our democracy involves so many efforts today, but this is one of the most exciting ones in my view, which is the opportunity to see an end to super PACs, which we all can celebrate as a defense of our democracy. So thank you all for being a part of this tonight.
Yeah, it was such an honor to hold space with each and every one of you. Thank you for laying down the foundations of all of this. One of my favorite quotes that I'd love to leave everyone with is that you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. That is from Angela Davis. And that is democracy as a verb in action, right? This Fall of Freedom program is a collection of artists coming together to fight against authoritarianism. If y'all, anyone in the audience wants to go to events, check out the Fall of Freedom website and go to a local event, see how you can get engaged. This is the first rendition of Spirit and Free Speech for People and Arts Equity Group's collaboration for this Imagine, Believe, Build series. We have an augmented reality installation that shows portals of what could be possible outside of the scope of the billionaire imagination. And we'll be doing regular events. If you want to tap in with us and you're in New York, we are going to be doing it. We're working in partnership with First Amendment Coalition, and it's December 15th. It's to commemorate the anniversary of the first adoption of the Bill of Rights in New York in Foley Square. So if you'd like to tap in, it's on First Amendment Friday, December 15th. But we'd love for y'all to continue engaging in this fight with us. We definitely need to claim our power from the billionaires so that we could see a better day. So peace and blessings. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.